Fab. So 62% of your current revenue driven by your meta activity is not being recognized. I'm going to let you sit on that just for a moment because that is a huge number. Now, most importantly, because you aren't recognizing this number, it means that you aren't planning or optimizing towards it. Now, we know the majority of brands aren't measuring their media effectively at the moment. And this flawed view of measurement means that you aren't realizing the full potential of it. And we want to change that for you. And throughout the last year, our expert teams across data and paid social have done rigorous testing and analysis to uncover the hidden potential of paid social and ensure that you can start to see that revenue. Now, we know measurement is an incredibly complicated area for brands to navigate at the moment. And I've spoken to a lot of you in this room in the last 6 to 12 months about it. And many brands are really trying to solve for this challenge by doing all of the right things. Firstly, there's been a huge increase in the searches for media effectiveness, and I bet that everyone in this room in the last 12 months or so has searched for that term or an equivalent. But that eagerness for knowledge has increased the noise, and getting a clear narrative can become really difficult. Secondly, brands are hiring to solve for the problem by bringing dedicated teams with experts in data strategy, data engineering, data science, and data analysis. And thirdly, those teams are investing more time and more money in a multitude of measurement solutions and technologies to address this challenge. But even with this increase in knowledge, spend, and interest, there's still a huge heap of confusion at the moment. We're going to help you with that. So there is no silver bullet currently for measurement. A lot of you in this room have heard me say that over the last 6 to 12 months. But there is a general consensus that econometrics and incrementality studies are seen as the gold standard in the industry at the moment. And they ensure that you're using the most accurate data for your day-to-day optimizations, your long-term budget planning, and reporting on those business metrics. So for anyone in the room that isn't familiar with these two methodologies, I'm going to give you a really quick whistle-stop tour of what they are and why you should be using them. Also, full disclosure, I'm going to stop saying the word econometrics because it is a mouthful on this stage, and we're just going to call it MMM. It is exactly the same thing. So if you want to know holistically what all of your channels are doing across the funnel and what is the optimal investment that you should be investing in those channels, you need to be doing MMM. It's a long-term statistical model that includes those external factors. So think competitor data, footfall, promotional data, even the weather can go in there. And the output then gives you a really accurate representation of your channel performance and enables you to forecast your KPIs better. Now, incrementality studies, on the other hand, are live experiments on your current activity. And they're used to answer those tactical questions. So think along the lines of, what's the incremental impact that my upper funnel meta activity is having on my overall sales? Now, they're short, sharp tests that give you an immediate steer on your performance. Now, I'm fully aware that not everyone in here can run an MMM study today or maybe even tomorrow. But we've done the analysis for you, and we're going to run you through the averages that we've seen across the agency and show you how you can apply these learnings to your brands. So, I reckon everyone in this room at some point in their careers had to set up a meta campaign. So I'm hoping that this is going to resonate with most people in this room and also doesn't bring any kind of past trauma back. So if it does, I am really sorry. But imagine that you've been given 100K, you set up your meta campaign, it goes live, you then log into the platform and you need to see what you're achieving in terms of your ROAS. You log in and you see that £1 value. That's the £1 value that you are using to do your day-to-day optimizations, your weekly reporting to your stakeholders, and kind of doing some of those tactical shifts, right? What are we seeing in terms of creative and ad set? Nothing new there. This is everything that everyone in this room has done before. You probably also then log into your attribution platform because you want to understand what that activity is driving in terms of that data-driven approach and, in the different touch points. And you see 18 pence. Again, from experience, panic is starting to set in. You're like, oh my God, what has happened here? And you're not really quite sure which number you're supposed to be reporting back to your business. Now, 9 times out of 10, both of those numbers get put on a presentation slide or an Excel report. Again, I'm sure most people in this room have done that before. And that's absolutely fine. And the one thing to understand with this is really focused on this short-term view. So that is the immediate payback that you are getting from your activity. As I say, the majority of brands, we've done it all at agencies, these are the numbers that we report on. There's nothing wrong with that, and many of you are stopping here. But I'm obviously going to ask you not to stop there. So we've taken, as I said, those averages across the MMMs that we've done throughout Brainlabs. Now, an MMM generally gives you a 4-week payback of what's kind of going on. So in this scenario, your ROAS goes back up to 81 pence. It's more in line with your in-platform. Everyone's a bit more comfortable with it. And it's definitely probably the most accurate number that you should be using for your reporting and your planning. But there's one final piece of this puzzle that we need to address, and that's understanding what the long-term impact is. And when we talk about a long-term impact, that's understanding what has happened in the up to 12 months, possibly even into 2 years, of what your activity has driven. Now, industry studies tell us that media drives long-term impact, and some channels are better at that than others, TV being the prime example. Again, not a surprise to anyone in here. But I think what is the most surprising, what is the most interesting, is that paid social is actually the 3rd best channel at driving long-term impact behind TV and generic PPC. And that massively surprised me, and I'm sure it's probably surprised people in this room. So what that means is you can apply that multiplier, and your 81 pence goes up to £1.62 in terms of that ROAS number. So going back to the start, that £100,000 that you invested has now generated £162,000 of long-term revenue for your brand. And that's the missing 62% that I spoke about at the start.
Wow. 62% cannot be ignored, which is why, over the last year, our teams have been working with you to run a series of incrementality tests on your Meta activity to help us understand what impact our Meta ads are having on our customers today, and to help us understand where that long-term effect is coming from. So before we dive into the results, I just want to say thank you for everyone in this room who has worked on a conversion lift study, a search lift study, because without your participation, we wouldn't have the results to share today. So let's dive in. Meta advertising has driven 137% more visits to your websites. It's driven 34% more people to go onto a search engine, to search for your brand, your product, your category, and to choose your listing through paid or organic search and go onto your site. On your site, it's also driven 42% more people to go and add products to your carts. And we're calling these long-term signifiers. They're actions that users take today that give us an indication that when they do come into market, they will be more likely to choose your brand over the competition. And so what we've done is we've looked at the results from our data across the different strategies and tactics that our clients were working on. And we've used that to put out some insights of how we can best manage our social activity in order to drive that long-term value that Hannah mentioned. So I'm going to skim over the first insight because just like my friend Bernie Sanders, I am once again asking you to spend more money on paid social. It's an obvious point, but it's a really important one. If you're making your budgeting decisions without seeing 62% of the value, then you're doing it wrong. You are underinvesting in paid social. And so I won't linger on it because I know it's a complicated thing to do to move your budget from channel to channel. But if you are underinvesting in paid social, if you invest more in paid social based on that long-term value, you will drive more value for your business. Now, the next thing we can think about is with your existing budget, what can you be telling the platforms to drive so that you can drive more of that long-term value? Generally, anyone close to digital media, everyone in this room will know that if you're trying to drive brand outcomes, you optimize your activity towards reach. You tell the platforms, serve my ad to as many people as you can for the lowest cost. On the other hand, if you're looking to drive performance outcomes, you say, actually, I'm willing to spend slightly more to serve this ad to someone that I know is high intent or in market. And what was really interesting when we did the analysis of our incrementality studies is that regardless of whether you're looking to drive brand outcomes or performance outcomes, running both conversion optimized and reach optimized campaigns drove more long-term value. And what I mean by that is, yes, in the short term, if you layer on some reach-optimized activity to your conversion campaigns, you will see an inflated CPA in your platforms because you're serving more ads to people of lower intent. And equally, if you layered on some conversion activity to your brand campaigns, optimizing towards some on-site indicators of intent, you'll see reduced reach because you're paying slightly more for those higher intent users. But the incrementality studies show us you're driving 11% more incremental sales and, importantly, 41% more of those long-term signifiers. So when you combine different objectives, you will drive more value for your business. And again, maybe that isn't practical. Maybe you sit in a business where you work in a performance team with one agency, you have a brand team that works with another agency, and you've got an invisible line of what you can optimize towards. So the final tip and how you can maximize that long-term value is all built around creative. Today, typically what we see is that brands will have a core creative concept for their campaign, a message that they want to communicate to their audiences. They'll turn that creative concept into an above-the-line ad, whether that's a TV asset or an out-of-home asset. And then they will take those assets and cut it into different shapes and sizes for running across digital media. And that is typically what we're running on paid social today. And that was fine in the past because it meant that you had a really clear message from your brand. It was all in your brand guidelines, and everyone that saw your ad, whether it was on digital, offline, or online, knew that it belonged to your campaign. But the challenge is today, particularly on social media, as Zara was talking about earlier, users are expecting to see hyper-personalized content, the content that is algorithmically served to be relevant to that user's interest. So if your single creative concept isn't interesting to an individual, they won't linger on it. They won't absorb the message that you're trying to communicate. And interestingly, the platforms will stop or be reluctant to serve that asset to other audiences with similar characteristics. And the way that this comes out in the data is that we saw a very strong positive correlation between the number of creative variants in a campaign and the amount of long-term signifiers that that campaign was able to drive. So while there is a cost to creative production, I understand that. If you recognize the long-term impact of paid social, you can do some very simple maths to understand how much more you need to be investing in your creative in order to drive that increased value, because increasing the number of creative variants will drive more value for your business.
So if you're going to take anything away from today, 62%, that's the number. 62% of your meta revenue is currently being unrecognized. And this means your strategy is probably completely wrong.
And if you want to unlock that value, there's 3 things we want you to take away. Make sure you're budgeting with that long-term value in mind. Work with your teams to change up your optimization strategy and include those multi-objective campaign structures. And finally, increase the variety of creative in your campaigns. And if you can do those 3 things, you'll be able to unlock the hidden value of social.